One of the biggest concerns I see gamers having is how long physical copies of games will be around for. Now, there's a lot of reasons for this, but I think one of the biggest ones is that we trust ourselves as collectors to keep these physical copies up on our shelves a lot better than we trust these game companies to keep these games up on their servers, because those servers are getting shut down at some point. It's just a matter of when. So it gives us a better feeling of control to have the physical copies ourselves rather than relying on who knows who to keep these games up on the server. So I'm actually approaching this topic from a point of optimism because I think there's a lot of circumstantial evidence that shows physical copies of games will be around for a really long time, at least longer than maybe a lot of people might think. And to me, one of the biggest reasons why I think physical copies of games will be around for a long time is that they still are right now. You know, a lot of people predicted that these physical copies would already be gone with the rise of digital. But here's how I look at it. So the rise of digital games is a very real thing. Nobody can deny that. And as that was happening, that trend was happening where more and more gamers were buying their games digitally, people just assumed, well, it's only a matter of time before it just completely takes over. And while it's true, a lot of gamers are fine with buying their games digitally, there's also a different group of gamers, people like myself and probably a lot of you watching, who insist on buying their games physically. And it's like, over my dead body, am I gonna buy a game digitally if there's a physical copy available? So physical copies were still selling, and therefore they're still around now. So it's obviously not everybody who wants to buy physical copies, but it is enough people, and I think they're vocal enough and demanding enough that they will be able to get those physical copies. And there's a lot of really great examples of this. For starters, we've got the physical copies of a lot of indie games. I mean, we have entire companies that are dedicated to bringing games that would not be receiving physical copies otherwise, and making physical copies of those games so that they're available. Now, sure, maybe the supply and demand doesn't always work out well with that because they're sort of trying to guess how many people are going to want something, but just the fact that these very non-mainstream games are getting physical copies of games because there's enough demand for it is very encouraging to me. But sometimes the physical copies of these indie games, I'll find that the situation is there's plenty of copies to go around. Quick little story for you. I went to buy Undertale, and actually they sell it at Best Buy, which that's another thing. It's the fact that they sell a game like that at a big box store like Best Buy, that's great. And Best Buy actually, they made a deal with Limited Run Games or but I can't remember the exact details of it. But the basic idea is that Best Buy was going to be selling these physical copies of indie games, which is great because it shows that it's making its way into the market, these physical copies of indie games. But so anyways, I'm getting a copy of Undertale and they have it at Best Buy. So I'm like, man, I better buy it right away because Undertale is a really popular indie game. So I was like, I better buy that quick because they'll probably sell out. And then I remember looking on the website, I don't know if it currently is still available on there or not, but for months and months after, it was still on there. So that was really encouraging to see. Something else I also noticed was that a lot of these indie games had physical copies that you could buy also on not just Best Buy, but Amazon and even Target I saw. So that's great just to show that there is that demand for it, that they're selling it at these widely available big box stores so that everybody can buy these games. Something else I've noticed is that whenever companies try to put out these video game products that are all digital, gamers are rooting hard for them to fail. And sure, there's some logistical reasons for why they're just not appealing or don't work or whatever, but I think at the root of it all is gamers are really rooting for these things to fail. And it's because the idea of a future that's just dominated by products like this just sounds like crap. The first product that's a good example of this would be the Xbox One S all digital, which abbreviated, of course, stands for Xbox One SAD. And man, Microsoft just cannot seem to name their Xboxes something that people don't want to make fun of. But anyways, what it basically was just an Xbox One S, but without a disk drive on it. And from what I remember, the pricing was way off, where you'd expect it to be cheaper, and most likely significantly cheaper because it's just taking away a feature. But it wasn't, so they screwed that up. The next product would of course be Google Stadia. Google Stadia. People love to hate Google Stadia. And you know what? They've given people a lot of reasons to hate it. The biggest one, in my opinion, is just that when they inevitably shut down their servers, all those games you bought are going to be gone, and there's no way to get them back, and they're certainly not going to care that you can't get them back. So, yeah. And depending when you're watching this video, maybe Google Stadia has already been shut down. But either way, the idea of a future where you're having to rely on Google to preserve your games instead of just having your own physical copies, it scares people. And I think that as long as there's a demand of people who just hate the idea of not owning their games physically, I think we will have those physical copies sticking around. Even if gamers have to spend more money in order to get a physical copy of a game, I think there will always be enough demand that they do it. Heck, it's what's already happening with these indie games. The physical copies of a lot of these indie games do cost more than the digital versions, so clearly gamers are willing to pay a little more in order to get that physical copy. And if you need another example of this for evidence, I've got a good one for you, and that would be collector's editions of games, which, can of course include big AAA mainstream games. Now, when you look at the overall sales of a big AAA mainstream game, the amount of people buying the big, physical collector's editions is a very small percentage, but they make them because there is still enough demand for it. They charge a little more and they can make money off of it. So why not just do that with a regular physical edition going forward? If, say, that's considered the weird, unusual thing people would want to buy, I still think it will be an option, even if they have to charge more. Now, obviously, we don't want them charging too much for it. Let's try to keep it fair, but just that idea is comforting to me. I think the last reason for optimism I have that physical copies of games will be around is that we live in a time where if enough people scream about something, certainly if enough gamers scream about something, what we've noticed in the gaming industry is that eventually people will hear it, whether that's making a remake of a game that people really want to see, or bringing a franchise back, or whatever. It seems like now these game companies are hearing us more than ever. And so I think that as long as there is that demand for those physical copies of games, then hopefully they will always be around. So anyways, those are my thoughts. I'm sure some of you have thoughts about this as well. Be sure to tell me what your hopes are going forward into the future as far as physical copies of games are concerned. And I'm sure maybe some of you watching don't even care about physical copies. That's perfectly fine. I respect that. It's not going to be every single person, even if it is, a very vocal portion of us. But anyways, those are my thoughts. Let me know yours down in the comments, and I will see ya in the next video.